Now, what Asher Cohen, the point in this article is comparing these instances that we've just spoken about of armed resistance, of which there were many. We've spoken about a couple, Abercovna and his group, and then the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. But there were also armed resistance movements in Chestovska and many other ghettos, extermination centres. There was armed resistance in Treblinka, in Auschwitz. But in terms of Hungary, he talks about why there wasn't an armed resistance movement in Hungary and there was in Warsaw and these other places. And did you read this, and do you remember the reasons that he gives as to why they chose? Because there was this dilemma. It was like, well, we can't do both. We've either got to launch an armed revolt against them, or we can choose non-violent means and choose to rescue instead. So the article's called Rescue or Revolt, and obviously in Hungary they decided to choose rescue.
So how I understood it, that the Jewish Federation, the Jewish organizations were very strong and on the side of the government. And they wanted to match the needs of the government. So there was no, they didn't think of armed resistance. Now, those people who did the resistance, actually, there is a little group in Budapest, which is called the Little Warsaw, in the 8th district. There is a little square. Now there is the labor camp memorial by Danny Weisinger, and there is a little synagogue as well there. It's called the Teleki Square Synagogue, and in around that synagogue, there is an urban legend how the Halutz resistance or the youth Zionist resistance is also kind of an urban legend of Hungary. That there were these people who took Nazi, not even Nazi, the Arrow Cross, the Hungarian Nazi party, uniforms, and then they took their guns, and then they disguised themselves as Arrow Cross people, the so-called Milos, and then they were killing whoever they found. Now, this story didn't go into the history books, and there's no testimonies about it, but there's legends. So we know this,
Yeah.
that there was kind of an armed resistance, and then the non-armed resistance was not only these guys, these youngsters who we are talking about. So there was Raul Wallenberg. He was not a Jew, but he saved Jews. Karl Lutz, Angelo Rota. Karl Lutz was the Swiss consul. Angelo Rota was the Italian. And there was the Palestine office and then there were in Istanbul, the Joint. So there was money there to save the Jews by Jewish organizations, from which these guys could feed. For example, we were talking about the orphanages, the children's homes. So how else would they have had money to feed those children in the children's home, if not from somewhere, for example, the Joint? Also, my father, when he was
It's interesting that lots of people, Raul Wallenberg is almost a household name to people. Lots of people know who Raul Wallenberg is, but Karl Lutz, much less people know about who he was, and I've always been, I don't know why that is, because his contribution was just as amazing, if not more so. I remember David Girth saying
Because he
that
has a more
he wanted
interesting story. Come on. Wallenberg has the most interesting story. He disappeared. We never know.
yeah.
We will never know how he died. So that's a mysterious story how the Soviets took him, and then so that was an amazing story how he saved one by one the people at the train station, and he was giving out the Schutzpasses, the forged documents to the people still at the train station. He had the list, and then he was shouting the names and taking off people from the trains. Karl Lutz made something totally different. He made a pact with Stoy, and then in return of weapons, he got visas. So all the visas, every visa, which was not a big number of visas, but he could initiate or how do you say issue
About eight. I think it was
in
about
the glass
8,000.
house. So yeah, in the glass house, in what we were talking about in connection with my grandmother Edith, that he in the glass house there was the forging workshop. So so these guys, when they were not in the workshop of the youth resistance movement somewhere around town, then they were there in the glass house in Vada Street, and then they were forging documents, which were the documents for Aliyah. So one visa out of these 8,000 was, like, for example, for not for one person, but for maybe 100 people. So they were like group visas to make Aliyah to go to Palestine then. So Karl Lutz had a very different story. I think this is the reason, but maybe something totally different.
And in the article, Asher Cohen, just to finish this article off, he gives the main reason why this youth resistance movement. So we've got these foreign bureaucrats of Wallenberg and Lutz, but if we're talking about grassroots youth resistance movements, so the main reason that they did, in the end, they were toing and froing, shall we choose armed revolt or shall we do non-violent resistance, is that the conditions in Hungary were very different, especially to that of Poland. So the Polish had been ghettoized for, if you're talking about the Warsaw Ghetto, so they had been in ghettos for around 2 to 3 years, and they'd suffered in these ghettos, so they'd had time to plan, prepare. In Hungary, it happened just in such a lightning quick speed that they didn't have this opportunity to, they didn't have a defeated army either. So they didn't have these weapons, and they didn't have the opportunity to organize a proper armed revolt. So it was on the spot. They had to think, okay, how can I use? And I think this is tying into some of the bigger picture messages I think that we can get from this story. So what can students learn from this? That you have to do what you can, and they use their intelligence, their ingenuity, to do whatever they could in this situation. And this was, okay, these forged passes, we don't have the time to sit around and think about this. We're just going to have to do what we can, and these forged passes were the direction that they chose to save lives.
Yeah, and then there is another name here. When he's talking about Asher Cohen, he's talking about Otto Komoly. That's a very, very important name, which is also not so well known as Wallenberg or all these other names from the Hungarian Holocaust. So Otto Komoly, he was originally an architect, and then but then he became a Zionist leader. He was one of the bravest. So he became the deputy chairman of the Hungarian Zionist Association in 40. And then he wrote 2 books on Zionism. And then during the Holocaust, he was among the most prominent Hungarian Jewish leaders to participate in rescuing the Jews of Hungary. So he was a fixer, he was an organizer, he was in contact with everyone. And then when we are talking about history or urban legends, then Komoly is a historical personality. So Komoly's rescue action of children was his most successful achievement. He worked in this area with Friedrich Born, the representative of the International Red Cross in Hungary. And then he due to his work, the Zionist youth movement could work with the children's homes, what we already mentioned before. And so he was he died in 45. He was shot by someone from the Arrow Cross Party in January in 45 in the Danube river, and then he must be remembered as well. And then what is the most interesting thing now is that the World B'nai Brit, the International B'nai Brit, and on the top of it, the president of the B'nai Brit is Alan Schneider, who sits in Jerusalem, and it seems to me that he considers it as his life goal that Komoly Otto is remembered. And then so there was a very big commemoration of Komoly Otto in the Jerusalem forest. A little part of the forest is named after him now. So Otto Komoly is also mentioned here in the Asher Cohen article we are talking about now, the dilemma of rescue and revolt, and he was also unarmed.
Excellent. And yeah, that's so interesting, because he's not someone that I really knew, and I'm gonna go away and learn a bit more about him. And I think one thing that you said I think we should get into our 3 quotes now, because one thing that you just mentioned, which leads perfectly into my 3 quotes, is you mentioned, and we haven't talked about this yet, but you mentioned that he was shot into the Danube by the Arrow Cross?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So this is we one thing about. Yes.
No, yeah. So our audience probably don't know who the Arrow Cross are, but we haven't talked about collaboration, and this is quite a controversial topic. And one reason that I think our project is so important is the state of affairs in Hungary at the moment in terms of Holocaust memory, and Holocaust denial and distortion is quite terrible. But Asher Cohen says one thing. He says, towards the end, he says, the majority of Hungarian people sympathized more with the persecutors than with their Jewish victims. And I know one of the most famous Holocaust historians of the Holocaust in Hungary, Randall L. Bramham, said something similar. But my quote, which is based on what I've just said there and links heavily, is by a Hungarian historian, and I'm sure you might know this guy. He's called Georgi Ranki. Is he a famous historian in Hungary?
Ranki György, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so he says,
Ranki György,
and this is quite a long quote, but I think it's worth quoting in length. He says, obviously, the German regime could operate only if it could rely to a large extent on the Hungarian state administrative machinery. Without the assistance of the various offices and the officialdom of the country, of the counties, the cities and the towns, as well as the police, the gendarme and the army, the whole Nazi conquering machine would, within a few days, have ground to a halt. What was unique about the German regime in Hungary was that a relatively large degree of national sovereignty was left in the hands of the Stoje government, who led the Arrow Cross, even more than had been done anywhere else. Yeah, even more than had been done anywhere else in Europe, including Denmark. The gendarme willingly assumed the task of organising the deportations with the help, direct or tacit, of the administration. So a lot of people won't know just how complicit in the murder of their own Jewish population the Hungarians were during World War II. And the Hungarians would deport them to the border. The Germans would then take over and then take them to Auschwitz. So they were partners in this murder operation. Is that how you see it?
Yes, I do, but I'm also very upset whenever the topic comes up here in Israel, because the narrative here in Israel is very different from the narrative in Hungary or among the Jews in Hungary. So here in Israel, it's like that it would happen the same way now as well, because the Hungarian nation is a fascist or Nazi nation. Now, I don't know how the personality development of a nation can be, but I would never think about Hungarians like this, because I don't think that it's anti-Semitism that is in Hungary. As I always say that anti-Semitism was a different thing before the war, and after the war, it's not. I always say it was not the best phrasing. So we always say, or there's a saying like this, and then Jews are not attacked in Hungary nowadays. Intolerance is a big lord in Hungary, and indifference as well, and not knowing about things as well. But yeah, you can read in old literature anti-Semitic voices, and then you can find anti-Semitic like undercover propaganda sometimes in politics nowadays as well, which is very, very sad. But in the same place, there's so many resistance movements right now in Hungary. There's so many civil organizations that are fighting the intolerance and anti-Semitism, and they are fighting for tolerance and for understanding each other, which is, I think, very important. Now, you asked me to pick also, and I don't know which. Yeah, this is the one. So I had a quote which we talked about already, and it was a quote from the 124th page of the Asher Cohen article. With the onset of deportations from Slovakia, there was a simultaneous movement of Jews fleeing south. Most Slovak Jews had extensive family connections on the Hungarian side of the frontier, and since they also spoke Hungarian, they experienced little difficulty in moving through Hungary. So this is talking about Trianon. How can a person speak Hungarian from another country? Because that part of the country was cut and then stuck into a different country, into a neighboring country. We talked about this when we talked about in the beginning of this podcast about the Treaty of Trianon. My other quote connected actually to one of your questions, which I didn't expect, but we talked about it already. It's on the 125th page. The established Jewish community organizations closely linked to the Hungarian political elite until the latter severed connections remained disoriented and helpless. So this in a lot influenced then and now as well the lives of Jews in Hungary, and here we can talk about that the second half of the 19th century, a new branch of Judaism was born in Hungary. It was called, and it is still called, the Neologue. So the Neologue Jews only exist in Hungary and in little parts of Slovakia, Czech Republic, and Austria. And it started this whole branch of Judaism. It started like the Reform in Germany, the Reform Judaism, but then it turned back to Orthodox. And then it's still not defined what it is, but this is what the branch of Judaism is in Hungary right now. It's mostly cultural Jewishness and very secular, mostly secular, and then cultural. So this is how I would define it, right? Like in a nutshell. And the third quote was about Otto Komoly. The important role, it's on the 126th page. The Hungarian Zionist Association operated within the law until March 44. The important role it played under German occupation was certainly unexpected. 4 distinct and practically independent initiatives merit note: that of Otto Komoly, president of the association, who maintained contact with a number of prominent politicians in August 44, established Department A for Children's Protection of the International Red Cross; that of Moshe Kraus, secretary of the Palestine office, who was in close communication with Swiss consul Karl Lutz and played a leading role in establishing a haven for many Jews at the so-called Glass House at 29 Vadas Street, a Budapest building that enjoyed extraterritorial status; that of the Relief and Rescue Committee led by Rezső Kastner and Joel Brandt; and finally that of Haluc youth movements. And here came to one new name, because we talked about Joel Brandt already, Kastner, which is a whole other topic as well, so long and so controversial that we can make another podcast about him.
Yeah. The topic of resistance in Hungary is absolutely fascinating, even without the actions of David Gür and his comrades during World War II, because you've got all of these official resistance movements. You've got deals that are being done with the Nazis, and the morality of that. Do you do deals with the Nazis even if you feel like you're saving lives? So there's so much in here. So I think that, and when we get to the further reading section, hopefully some of our audience will go and just delve into this period of history, because it's absolutely fascinating. I've got one more quote that I want to read out.
And what they cannot find in history books or anywhere is that, sorry to interrupt, Jonny,
okay.
Something came to my mind right now, that whenever we are saying that the Hungarian Jews, there was so many resistance and very creative ones, without arms, without weapons. I think it's a Hungarian thing, although Israelis would say that it's an Israeli thing to make everything in the smart way, it's also a Hungarian thing, that you solve everything is gonna be fine because you solve it, even if you don't have the opportunity for it. So you go against all the rules, which is a very good, actually a very good Hungarian characteristic as well.
Yeah, I think that's really good because I'm going to talk about some of the bigger picture messages, what our students could learn from this period history. I think that's perfect for that. I just want to read out
Oh,
one
great.
quote before we move to the next section. So something
Okay.
I think this is from the article. It might be, I'm not sure, but it was so the historian of the Warsaw Ghetto, Emanuel Ringelblum, who is a famous figure in Holocaust history. Um, so he was a Jewish historian that was caught in the Warsaw Ghetto, and he began an archive that documented many things. He was eventually found in an underground bunker and shot. But one of the things that he chronicled was a saying that was in the Warsaw Ghetto that was to do with armed resistance, and it said, we must think not so much of saving our lives, but rather of dying an honourable death, dying with weapons in our hands. And that's one of those things that really, it just leaves you pause for thought, because we all have goals and ambitions in life, and it's incredible that my fellow human beings got to a stage in their life where their goal was to die in a dignified way. They knew that they were going to die, but it was important to them that they died in the right way. And that was one of those quotes that just made me stop and think about, the suffering of these people, but also how it mattered to them, how they died.
It's very important, I think, for everyone. For it's a common thing that people want to die with dignity.
Yeah.
I
No,
think
and I'm not religious, and I don't really hold that many
it's
irrational
not even
views,
about
but that's one of
religion.
no, obviously, because I'm not religious, but
I,
it's always been something that I thought was really important, that people, how you die is important.
well, I don't care about how I die, but I don't. For example, I don't want to be a burden to my family when I die. Okay, so that's a thing. Like you don't like I had an uncle who was already in brain death with in the hospital, and then the family they had to decide whether they
Yeah,
take him off from the machines. And we saw Arik Sharon, the prime minister of Israel, who fell into a coma, and he was living in a hospital like this for many years. And then we were always talking about it. Is it a is there dignity there to keep someone alive like this? But of course, in the
uh,
show, that's a different. It's a different thing. Yes, what you are talking about right now, but it's for a lot of people, not only that is important, how you live, but how you die as well. And also, you don't want to be remembered that you were one of the sheeps that went to the slaughterhouse.